one of the biggest things has happened in Brisbane that I can ever recall during my news coverage and whatnot. And I really wanted to break down the G20 and what to expect from the G20, some of the laws, some of the things that have been introduced under these laws, what is being planned in reaction. I really want to chat about the entire G20 circle and then have some discussions amongst ourselves about what we can expect, our opinions on some of it. But I really want to get straight into it. For those who don't know, obviously the G20 Summit is a meeting of the 20 largest economies in the world, and they come together once a year to apparently discuss politics, economies, and a whole range of other issues that supposedly to benefit us as a people. So it was announced, just about 2 years ago that the G20 Summit was coming to Brisbane in 2014. So we've had a significant amount of time to get a basic idea about what we can expect. But really, most of the new information has only just come out recently. It's only just been revealed, some of the later stages of these legislative pieces. So shortly after it was announced, the G20 Safety and Security Bill 2013 was introduced, which set unprecedented police powers for Queensland Police within what is being called an exclusion zone at the start. Now it's called a security zone. The laws were quickly established to dictate what is going to happen underneath these laws. But I'll get into that in a sec. Some of the brief statistics that have come out about the G20, about what to expect. There's going to be upwards of 6,000 security troops. Some say 7,000. It's a big number. There's going to be a lot of security here, and we're already seeing it starting to roll out in Brisbane at the moment. 4,000 delegates are going to be here. An ocean liner. There's going to be an ocean liner. 12 sniper teams are going to be within the city on buildings. So 12 teams of snipers, not just 12 snipers, 12 teams of snipers. 5,000 protesters expected. Some travelling internationally, I don't know. A lot are going to be here domestically, travelling from other states. And $370 million was the estimated cost for the G20 Summit, but when you add on a lot of the other expenditure, it's gone way above that we as taxpayers are paying. So soon, once all of this was announced, they announced that drones were going to be introduced to surveil for crime prevention in the lead up to the G20. They then announced that strip searches would be happening. They have the potential to happen under these laws, under some of the discussions that they had. They introduced these special search laws, but I'll get into that. A number of forums were discussed about the use of independent legal observers, civil liberties, and much more was held as the G20 was announced it's coming to Brisbane. So we do have two zones. A declared area is accessible by all members of the public. So there's a declared area which takes up most of the city, goes back up to Spring Hill. It's the exclusion zone, and thankfully we're just outside of it at the moment. But there's two different zones within this exclusion zone. So the declared area is where all members of the public can go, which is you can just roam the city. It's just that these laws do apply, but a restricted area is closed access areas which are marked by barriers, and you can only go in there if you're a personnel with a badge and whatnot. And some of these restriction zones include, of course, the Convention and Exhibition Centre, which has been fenced off as of yesterday. And Johnno, there was some developments that just happened yesterday. It was introduced with people trying to take photos.
Yeah, look, I haven't got the article in front of me, but I think last night a person in his 50s was arrested. Apparently he was taking photos near the exclusion zone, near the Brisbane Convention Centre. And he was arrested allegedly for not supplying his details to the police. But what had he been doing for them to ask him about his details? Apparently just taking photos. That was all the information that I had, but I haven't got the article in front of me, so I can't say more. But the point is, the first arrest pertaining to the G20 happened last night, well before any of the real fun kicks off in earnest.
Yeah, well, I didn't have much details itself, but it's just an example. It's a precedent of how easy it is for people to be arrested during the G20 Summit before it even kicks off. These restricted zones have just been set up. They've just been put into play as of yesterday. These laws are now in effect. And And someone taking photos apparently has just been arrested for not supplying his details to the police when he was just taking photos of the convention centre. So there's already been arrests, and I hope I'm wrong, but as history has shown, there should be a lot more on the way.
Well, if they're trying to break records, it's one down, 1,199 to go. Is that it? Was it 1,100 in Toronto?
Yeah, you've got it all wrong, because the lady in charge, the police lady in charge, was on. There was a big special feature in the Courier Mail yesterday morning.
You're not talking about the front page, are you, Lindsay?
No. This is inside.
We've seen that special feature.
No, this is inside in a little bulletin goes with it, and she was saying we don't want to arrest anybody.
Mm.
That was the whole point. We don't.
Yeah. They've sort of been, over the past, since it's been announced, they've been flip-flopping between. There's been news reports saying the police have been told to expect a minimum 1,000 arrests to prepare for it. Then they've come out and said, no, we want to uphold civil liberties and have legal observers to make sure that these arrests don't happen. And it's just, it's hard to, piece together what's actually the motive.
Sorry if I'm preempting something that you're about to say, but do we know yet where these arrestees, if there are hundreds of arrested people, do we actually know yet where they're being taken?
No, I haven't found any information to know where they have been taken.
Because I've tried to look into this, and I've been mixing with different people who are planning to protest and cover the protest and network as much as I can prior to the event. And I've been asking people, do you guys know where arrested people get taken? And some people have said, I don't know. Some people have said, I do know, but those people all give different answers. I'm yet to actually get a solid answer. And I noticed that the Brisbane, the big rectangular stadium in Brisbane called Suncorp Stadium, which hosts soccer matches and rugby matches, it's a world-class stadium, Suncorp. I've noticed that is just inside the exclusion zone. And of course, in Toronto, people who were arrested were taken to a massive film studio, which had been converted into a number of high-volume detainee cells. We could basically put a dozen or 24 detainees in the cell together, have a couple of police watch over them, and in that way have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people in detention at the same time. That's what they did in Toronto a few years ago. Yeah. But I'm yet to learn what they're doing here. Now, I'm not saying they are using Suncorp, but that wouldn't surprise me at all, because
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because I got a little pamphlet in the mail, and it had a road just near Suncorp that they were going to do car searches and things. So, and I was trying to work out how you get from there into the centre of the city or whatever, but no, that's probably what it is. And they had the army, they were a big deal about how they were looking under cars and the whole bit.
Yeah, and I was never good enough at soccer or rugby to make the Australian team. This could might be my first chance to get on the turf at Suncorp. What do you reckon, Lindsay?
Oh, yeah, no, I did that when I was a kid. I played on. I won't go on with that anymore.
Yeah.
You're like a father figure to me, Lindsay. I hope that if I get there, you'll come and watch me from the stands.
Lindsay with these signs. We'll move on. Yep. So we've gone part. So the basic rundown is the G20 was announced, the laws were introduced, and some of these actions have already started to be taken. I'll just get into some of the laws now, because it's really important to not just activists that are going out there, not just people that are planning, media personnel that are going to be there. It's everyday citizens that are going to be walking through the city that may not have any idea about these laws and what it could, how it could affect them. And so I'll just go through that because it's really interesting stuff when you actually look into the laws when they were first introduced and what's transpired since then. Under the G20 laws, it is an offence to disrupt, interfere with, delay or obstruct the conduct of any part of the G20 meeting or an activity associated with the G20. Interfere with the reasonable enjoyment of any part of the G20 meeting, be inside the restricted area without an appropriate access pass, and possess a prohibited item in the declared area without reasonable excuse, fail to comply with police direction. So the police searching and questioning powers is where it comes in. So that's what it is an offence to do, those three things, to interrupt and to disrupt, and some of the general basic things that you would expect. The police search and questioning powers is what has got civil liberties groups really concerned with some of the draconian type laws and that have been enforced. The police have the power to search any person in the declared area, any person attempting to enter, about to enter, or attempting to leave the declared area. the police have the power to conduct various types of searches, including X-ray scans, electronic scanning, or a walk-through detector. They have the power to conduct searches of any person's belongings, including a bag or mobile phone. They can require you to remove the outer clothing items such as headwear, jackets, or footwear which may be searched. And there's more invasive search that the police can do if they suspect a person is in possession of an item without a lawful excuse, which I'll get into, and a person that is prohibited or excluded from the exclusion zone. And these are under Clause 20, 21, and 23 of the bill. There's a basic search, a frisk search, which speak for themselves, and then there's a specific search under Clause 23, which is a search of all clothing worn by the person, including a strip search on the spot of the person and or medical x-ray of the person, which has, raised a lot of concerns because you can see that it is an offence to just have some of these prohibited items, which some citizens may not even know that they're carrying. I'll read a list of what they are momentarily, but it seems that there's a vague definition of what you can be offended for and what the police can suspect you of, and just a complete civil violation. The police have the power to ask for your name, address, and date of birth. They have the right to ask you to produce ID and the right to ask you why you're in the declared area under these new laws. So if the police ask you that, you are required to answer that under these laws. And it is an offence to disobey or not comply with any of these requests by the police. So if you refuse, or if you even try to question, it can be taken as an offence and you can just be arrested there on the spot. And this is important because of the Toronto summits that we can relate to about how citizens are trying to exercise their rights and police saying you need to do this, you need to do that, and just being arrested. And I know you mentioned last week on the show, Lindsay, that your civil liberties, you've noticed, have diminished over your lifetime as it's progressed through. How would you feel about getting strip searched potentially for being in the declared area, even if you're not at the protest?
Yeah, well, this mob have got form already, this Queensland Police Service. I had a run-in a long time ago, and I followed them through all the way up to the Deputy Commissioner. And in the end, I had to do a freedom of information, and I got their legal advice to them, telling them that they couldn't ask for identification on the street.
Yeah.
But then 2 weeks later, there was an article in the Courier Mail, of all things, of police on horseback demanding identification from young kids on the beach up at Noosa. So they're crooks right from the word go. So now, this, to me, I'm not surprised that they do this sort of thing. If they can think they can get away with this, what worries me is, are they going to try and hang on to this after the G20? That's my big thing.
And that's where we can get into a discussion after I just go through the basic rundown. But it just seems like it's a really extreme measure just for something as little as maybe holding some of these prohibited items, which I'll go through, which, we could have a laugh about, but this is exactly what is under the G20 law. A wide range of objects are deemed prohibited items, including knives, glass bottles, jars, metal cans and tins, egg reel and replica firearms and weapons, so toy guns, graffiti instruments, two-way radios and loud hailers, air horns, marine warning devices, any device emitting smoke, any device that doesn't matter, laser pointers, any object capable of being used to construct a stage, remote control devices, kites are not allowed, so if you're out flying a kite that day, then
you're gone.
Balaclavas, face masks, and face paints, other than religious items, which could conceal your identity, and fake security accreditation. You can only take a prohibited item into a security area with a lawful excuse. An example of a lawful excuse is a family using knives to consume food at a barbecue at South Bank Parkland. So if you're holding a knife, you can say, well, we're having a barbecue here. But one of the things that were under it was reptiles. You're not allowed to have reptiles in the city. And it just seems that this is just, I understand that they have a job to do and there needs to be precautions, but this is just going way over the top. What do you think?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's a shame they didn't announce the ban on reptiles until relatively late, because they foiled this plan that I've been working on for 2 years. All of those reptiles are...
Have they done spiders or anything like that, or not? Or they haven't got down to it? No, where does it end? Where does it end?
Yeah, it's unbelievable. But if you've got your pet turtles and you're planning to overthrow, you better watch out, because turtles are going to be...
One of the things you mentioned was that we're banned from taking devices that could be used to create a stage. And I just want people to keep that in mind for later in the show when I discuss some things to do with Eastern Ukraine. But you mentioned earlier, Ethan, that they've got 12 sniper teams here in Brisbane for the G20. And what I want to know is, how do they arrive at the figure of 12 sniper teams? How do they determine that that was the necessary number of sniper teams to keep us safe? And can you imagine what was happening in the room, the big boardroom where they were discussing this? Was one guy lobbying for 14 and another guy saying, no, I think 10 should be more than enough. We'll reach a compromise at a dozen sniper teams. I mean, how do they even determine we need a dozen teams of snipers? But look, they could be trained on us right now for all we know.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
No. Well, I heard that they're bringing New Zealanders over as well.
Yep.
Right. So you run through them all. Right. The federal police have got 3 or 4. The army's got a few they can loan. There's a couple from the police. There's a couple from New Zealand, and it just 12. All right, we'll use a lot of them. That's all that.
I think it's important to note that each leader can bring their own security. I think the estimate was up to 800 if they want of their own security personnel. So the Secret Service or whatnot can all be here, and from the reports, they're already here, scoping the city already. So it's interesting to be here as everything. We're still a week out, a week from just under a week from today, and it's interesting. So I will keep my reptiles locked up, John.
It's worth bearing in mind, too, at the Occupy Wall Street protests a few years ago. It was later leaked from the FBI or one of those spaghetti alphabet agencies that one of their plans had been that if the mainstream media bombardment attacking the protesters didn't disperse them, because that does tend to happen. We're herd animals. If the mainstream media says that these guys are all bad, they're causing problems, they tend to lose public support and it dissipates. Their plan was, if that didn't work, they were going to assassinate the leaders of the protests. And it's instructive for any protesters who plan to go to these protests in Brisbane to bear in mind that at any time they could very well be literally in the firing line of one of these dozen sniper teams.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that intrigued me during the week is that after all the stuff on the front of the paper for a fortnight now, trying to scare hell out of everybody in Brisbane, people have decided we won't go anywhere near this place. And then the Lord Mayor comes out and says, "Oh, this is terrible. We've got to have people there. All our guests will wonder what's going on if it's the whole area is deserted." So they can't make up their mind whether they want to secure the place or whether they want the public there or they want the public out of it. Nobody seems to know what they want.
I think, again, it's important to note that this applies to anyone that's in the declared zone, whether you're a protester in the heart of the protest or you're going down to the local shop. It appeals to anyone, and the civil liberty groups have said that there's potential that civilians could get just caught up in this, and there could be mass arrests due to that, due to protesters not knowing what's going on, because they have to live in this city. They don't want all of this. We've talked about there's no reason for these people to be coming and interrupting cities other than to serve their own agenda. So it's troubling. These laws are really troubling.
Yeah, you mentioned how the exclusion zone doesn't yet extend to where we're sitting at the moment. Obviously, we're doing this show from my place in St. Lucia. Of course, it was rumoured during the week that Barack Obama might be giving a speech at the University of Queensland, which is, of course, just down the road from me here in St. Lucia. Now, if that were to happen, I don't think that's been confirmed yet, but if that were to happen, you'd imagine they would just extend the exclusion zone, and next thing you know, the Australian Roundtable is, boom, in the crosshairs, isn't it?
Yep. Well, under these laws, they do have the ability to search houses within the perimeter zone, and they've got their car checkpoints. They can direct traffic wherever. They can search cars. It's just completely rolling out, just as it's come into effect yesterday. But after you're arrested, so if you're unlucky enough to get arrested for your reptiles, police officers have the power to hold arrested individuals for a length of time, quote, reasonably necessary, unquote, to establish the person's identity, and to do one or more of the following: release them without charge, charge and release on bail, give the person an exclusion notice requiring them to leave the declared area and not return until the end of the G20. And for those out there that are concerned about maybe what your rights are and your responsibilities, we've talked about that everything's been piled against you, that you're losing your rights. The Caxton Legal Centre has released a number of information pieces on your rights and responsibilities during the summit. And I'll post them within the description of this video, along with links to the legislation, links to various informational pieces for our people that are interested in that. Some of our people are going to be here in Brisbane, but there has been a collective of protest groups that have come, and I want to get now into the last part, talking about the people's response to this. What are the people going to do that are protesting? And one of the groups is the Brisbane Community Action Network, otherwise known as BrisCan G20, have formed a response to the G20 meeting throughout the whole week. It starts with Visioning Another World, which is the People's Summit, which is a 3-day festival of idea sharing, art, creative activities, education, workshops throughout the city. And that will be from November 12th to 14th. And then on the 15th is when the major People's March is happening. And I know that I'll be there covering it for my website, TOTTnews.com. And a lot of citizen journalists are going to be there, and we're going to be broadcasting the Australian Roundtable during the summit, talking about what's transpiring over the week. And I'm excited to head out to that. With all the negativity with these laws and seeing police everywhere and seeing a pretty draconian Brisbane at the moment, I'm excited to go and talk about, politics, and there's Trans-Pacific Partnership and alternative media and all of these workshops that are happening, to go out and get interviews and whatnot, and to really share common ideas with like-minded people in response to this, and to say, that it's not all bad, that, there's going to be a lot of creative effort and a lot of, response to this within the scope of the G20, Lindsay.
Yeah. So people will start to find similar people, similar outlooks, and it'll help to bring people together. And
it's a great time for Australian alternative media, and for some of our international listeners out there who will try to get their information from the Australian mainstream media, which I can just envision what's going to be coming with that, with the Courier Mail. We're providing a hub to talk about what's really happening at these protests, just as citizen media journalists did in Toronto, just as everything has done, and we're going to be here at the front line to report that. So if you want to learn about BrisCan's response, you can go to briscan.net.au/program, which has the timetable of all the programs. If you're in Brisbane, if you want to get involved, there's the Citizen Media Centre. There's also a number of handbooks, activist resources, and more on the BrisCan website, and you can find out information about the Indigenous response to the protests as well. So here we are today, and now the new laws within the security zone are now set up until November 17th. Police have been told, as we've mentioned, to expect minimum of 1,000 arrests. Court will be live streamed to the public 24 hours a day, it was announced, because they're expecting that many protesters. I saw this morning on the ABC that they've announced that sonic cannons will be in play if they need to be used. Sonic cannons, which we have seen at other G20 protests. Obviously, the catalyst with the anarchy anticipated from questionable groups such as the Black Grove Syndicate. Traffic is subjected to reroutes, and public transport's heavily disrupted. So, gentlemen, I wanted to just get into a basic discussion about maybe what are your expectations. What do you see this mirroring what happened in Toronto? Do you see police? Do you see police engaging in mass arrests, or do you see just everything going along as planned, Lindsay?
I have no expectations. Until I met you fellas, I had no idea what had happened in Toronto and what would happen here. I've had very minimal to do with police, but I remember once on the side of a road talking to a policeman and discussing the fact that I was a man and I had certain rights, and he got very aggro about that. So I'm not sure what we're going to expect from them. I'm sure some of them are reasonable, but some of them really do look upon us as sheep, and they're the cattle dogs or the sheep dogs, and I don't know what to expect from them. I hope they do use some restraint. That's all I can say.
Importing New Zealand police to help watch over the sheep, Lindsay, would be a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
I wanted to note before we move on from the topic, which we won't for a while, but I just wanted to point out to the listeners who are wondering, hey, they're the alternative media. They're trying to branch out to the establishment to network with them. I want to say that I did send an email to the G20 asking to get one of their members on as a guest of the show. And so far, no response, Lindsay, but we are trying. Take my word for it.
Yeah, well, my expectations is, as you said, I don't know what to expect because this is the biggest thing that I've been a part of in Brisbane, and all of these leaders that are going to be here, they're all going to be in one place, and the security is starting to ram out. And just seeing Brisbane, how it is becoming fortressed off at the moment, it's something that I haven't expected. And, we can look at Toronto where there was 1,100 people arrested and only 44 charges were laid. 44 out of 1,100 people arrested. It becomes to a point where I don't know what to expect, but we're going to be there on the front lines reporting whatever it is that happens. And I do hope that it goes along peacefully because there's going to be mass protests on the day, not just Brisbane. There's pro-G20 summits. There's anti-Putin summits. There's, over 20 different groups having 40 events as of this Wednesday throughout the city. So it's going to be massive. And, it's going to be a roller coaster. I really think it's going to be.
And I'm hoping that those groups don't start into fighting with each other either. That'd be even worse.
Well, at the end of the show, in our final thoughts, we'll discuss the days that we plan to live broadcast about the G20, and we'll get into more discussion about that at the time. But can I ask you two right now, especially you, Ethan, do you have any predictions about which day might be the most likely to see uproar and arrests and these kinds of things? Because my own personal opinion is that the Saturday is going to be the key day. I understand that Brisbane and other groups are planning to do a march, which has been okayed supposedly by the Queensland Police, and they're going to go through to Musgrave Park. I see two issues with this. Firstly, in the so-called free speech zones that were made available to the protesters in Toronto, people were still, the police call it corralling. They were corralled into a section and then mass arrests took place and allegedly beatings took place. Unfortunately, we don't have any video evidence to verify whether this is or not the case because the video footage of that happening was confiscated. But allegedly, those protesters who were in the free speech zone were accosted by the police and mass arrests took place. So just because you're following the rules that have been laid down to you doesn't mean you're immune. The second issue is I understand that a number, or at least one, Indigenous group who use Musgrave Park as one of their hubs for protests are planning to stay late and possibly even camp out at Musgrave Park on the Saturday. And if that's their plan, I hope I'm wrong about this, but I can see some really big troubles going down there. I mean, we've seen even before the G20 mass police, not just brutality, but overt aggression in general towards these kinds of Indigenous groups at Musgrave Park in the past. Footage is still available on YouTube. If anyone just wants to Google Musgrave Park Police, you'll see it for yourself. That was before G20 even got here. So what's going to happen now that we've got G20? You're going to have all these other disparate groups protesting at G20 making their way to Musgrave Park. If there's going to be anything terrible go down, I suspect, and I hope I'm wrong, Musgrave Park on Saturday is going to be where it takes place.
I do believe the Saturday will be the major catalyst for, whatever's happening. And, we've shared personal beliefs before, and my personal belief of Australia heading towards a police state. And you mentioned before about what happens if these laws, if they hang on to these laws after it, if they say, well, hang on a minute, look at all the mass arrests that we had to do, look at all the trouble that was caused, maybe we need to keep these laws on in general, and then boom, you're walking down the street getting strip searched, whatever the case may be. I hope I'm wrong, but I do see that this could be the catalyst for something. With the direction that Australia's been heading, I have said on camera before, I do believe that police provocateurs will be here, just as evidence has clearly proved in Toronto that they were there, allowed to smash up buildings, then for the protesters to be the victim of the police brutality. I do believe that they're there because it seems inevitable. All of this media hype, all of these anarchy on this Courier Mail, anarchy, police, the invasion is coming, all of this. What would happen then if we went out and we're all peaceful and worked together? It would have devastating effects for the media getting their point across. It would not serve the agenda of the police and the people that are controlled. And it just seems like the G20 in the current landscape of Australia could be the perfect catalyst for something big.
And of course, the G20 will be held again in about 12 months' time. I don't even know who hosts the next G20, but the point is they're also going to roll out thousands of police dressed up in tactical, essentially army gear. How can you justify that? Well, look what happened at the last one. I mean, they need to have agent provocateurs. They've been caught doing it before, and that's why I'm particularly interested in covering the protest. I'm not actually planning to take part in any of the protests myself. I just want to walk down from a safe distance, use the zoom on my camera and just record what happens, because I think we need to do that. And all the listeners at home who are listening to this before the protests, because obviously our episodes are archived, you could be listening to this in a year and nothing happened. I hope that's the case. But if you're listening to this before you go to the protests, please make sure that your camera is fully charged. Make sure that your phone is fully charged so you can use that as a camera. Make sure that as many of us are covering what happens as possible, so that if and when these agent provocateurs come around, we can get as much footage of them as possible, so that we can say to the next host city the same way that Toronto said to us, hey, look, they do this. The police and other agencies pretend that they are protesters. They do bad things to justify all of the police brutality. Let's catch these guys in the act. And that's why they have that unofficial media hub that I think Brisbane is running somewhere near the city. They'll have that one, and good on them for doing that. I'm going to be using my place here in St. Lucia to do the same thing. So if anything does happen at that Brisbane G20, or whoever is hosting that unofficial media hub, if anything does happen, just get in touch with us here at Australian Roundtable. We want to make sure that independent journalists, citizen journalists, anyone who's covering this has somewhere to get together, use the internet, and tell the world what's happening. Because essentially, that's what I'm here for. I'm not here to protest. Look, I've taken part in other protests, but really there's a bigger calling for me here, and I think for us as a group, is to cover what happens to the protesters. Because you know what? A lot of those protesters are involved in protests that I don't think are valid things to complain about. But that's their right, Lindsay. That's their right to do that. Yeah. And who is making sure that those protesters get treated fairly in what is supposed to be a democratic country? Well, it's up to the citizen journalists, isn't it?
No, I agree. And like you're saying, I'm just wondering whether we can form a hub where people send copies of all the videos they have. Because I remember in places in America when things happened, it was the first videos that were the important ones before it was all rewritten or redacted, whatever. And it'd be nice if we had a copy of that. Maybe even be able to do face recognition of some of the provocateurs or whatever, so we know what we're doing.
Yeah, and it is important to discuss this, because we do have to stick together as a community, as citizen journalists, whether we have issues or not, whether we disagree with each other or not. Some of these, some citizen journalists that I don't get along with, I've said, we can collaborate together. This is about covering what's happening at G20 and covering it because the mainstream media won't. And I'll be covering it on my site, TOTTnews.com, for a quick plug there. We'll be, our YouTube channel will be, we'll have hopefully have interviews and everything all up, and I just think we're in for one hell of a roller coaster.
Yeah, well, if this gets out to enough people, maybe they'll see us as the lightning rod, and people may well come to that side.
Yeah, look, I'm hoping that media hub that Brisbane have put together is the lightning rod, as you put it, and we're essentially just a smaller. I'm happy for us to be the small group if there's a bigger group of people doing this. I think it's important, though, that we don't centralise too much, because it makes it that much easier to shut it down if and when that's the decision. And we're not going to give out my address or my phone number here over the show, but if anyone does want to get in touch with Australian Roundtable, just get in touch with either our Gmail account, which is australianroundtable@gmail.com, or through YouTube, youtube.com/Australian Roundtable. If you've got something you want to get out to the world, get in touch with us. If you've got a good story to tell and you want to be on one of our live shows next week, get in touch with us. We'll get you on board. Let's get the truth out to the world, because the world wants to hear it and the stories deserve to be told. In saying that, I want to make this very clear to all of the audience and to you guys here as well. If you're a protester, like a genuine protester, but you think that any kind of violent activity is going to further your cause, you're an idiot. And I, for one, if I'm near these protests and I see anyone, and I don't think they're a provocateur, I just think they're a dumb protester engaging in violent activity, I will be the first one to try and shut them down, because they're going to get us all in trouble. So if you're a real protester of any kind, and for whatever reason you think that engaging in violence or aggression towards the police or towards businesses nearby is a good idea, think again. It's not a good idea. And if I see you, or if any smart protester sees you, you'll be shut down, which is exactly what happened in Toronto. The union organizer, one of the trade union leaders, saw an Asian provocateur, and he was the first one to shut him down. And that's what we have to do as protesters. We're here to protest peacefully. We're not here to be aggressive towards the police, who ultimately are just doing their job, whether you like it or not. If the sucker at the front line of the police wasn't doing his job, someone else would be doing it, okay? They're just people. They just happen to be paid to be on the other side. They're not really our enemy. Our enemies are those agents provocateurs and the people who are behind them. So they're the ones we're out for. Protesters, if you see someone doing something stupid and they're meant to be a protester, you shut them down. Let's make this a peaceful protest. Let's make this the most peaceful protest ever. And if we catch those agent provocateurs, let's capture them on video.
Yep. And I'll point out on air as well that I'm not going to be taking place in any violent activity. I'm not planning to do anything illegal. So everyone out there, just check the info box for PDF files about your rights and responsibilities. Get educated, and let's cover what's actually happening.
Before we move on to the next topic, Lindsay, any final thoughts on G20?
I don't know whether this is important. If you've got more important things to talk about, I'm just referring to the Courier Mail letters to the editor during the week, and there was a man who, and I'll read a bit of it. A man who came out and was against the idea of police or soldiers or anybody behaving in drills in the city without having any insignia on. And then there was a reaction, and it was like the sheep came out bleating afterwards the next day. And now, I know with the Courier Mail, those sheep probably all put in there, and anybody agreed with this fellow was probably kept out.
Yep.
But I'll just read it to you very quickly. It was by a man named Merv Bartlett. I don't know Merv Bartlett. Secret manoeuvres in the dark should frighten all Australian citizens. Now that was a story on the page 5 on the day before. The reporter refers to a mysterious high-level military operation in the CBD overnight. Accordingly, I am driven to ask, to whom are these heavily armed and battle-dressed persons responsible? An Australian Army officer or the Queensland Police Commissioner? This is bizarre. We have roaming the streets of Brisbane by night two presumably separate law enforcement agencies, one being police of officers, both state and federal, and the other apparently consisting of platoons of soldiers under the command of a lieutenant or higher. This is a recipe for disaster unless there's strict protocol and even stricter coordination between the parties. During World War II, Peter Ustinov reported that the streets of London became the meeting place of officers and soldiers from all over the globe, and that when he walked down the street, he was amazed by the number of salutes being exchanged between men and women in so many varied uniforms. He purchased a large trench coat of khaki colour, bought a pair of knee-length leather black boots and a peaked cap, and everybody saluted him. Journalist Conor O'Brien further described the secretive goings-on in the Brisbane business district and, quote, the group was dressed in olive-coloured military-style clothing with no apparent badges identifying themselves or their agency. Some appeared to be wearing body armour. Personnel on the scene refused to provide any details of the operation or the agencies involved when asked by the Courier Mail, end of quote. Now, no one claims to own these heavily armed people, so any group of men could do a Peter Ustinov and clad themselves in what seems to be military gear. These protective moves on the part of those we entrust with the job of keeping the peace have morphed into a disturbing secrecy. Citizens going about their business in the wonderfully free land of my birth should not be palmed off when inquiring about such clandestine actions as was the case with the Courier Mail. And I won't go any further. The letter goes on. It was quite a long letter. But I see the point. And we had at the APAC meeting in Sydney, the Chaser Group pretended to be Secret Service agency escorting Osama bin Laden to that conference.
The Chaser Group are an AB, Australian Broadcasting Corporation. They used to have a show, a group of guys relatively young who used to do funny things.
Yeah. And this carries out exactly what this man is referring to. Anybody, if they dress up and look the part, can just go about doing whatever they like. Now, what happens if plenty of people in Brisbane get shot? Who do we go to? All we see is a man in a green uniform or a khaki uniform. Who do we go to? We've got no way of identifying these people. And like we said with that picture there, it looks like a Muslim woman where only thing you can see is the eyes.
Yeah.
So how do you identify any of these people?
Yeah, well, that's one thing I missed to say is that there was articles saying that police, even police as well, don't have to wear their name tags during the G20 summit, so we can't even ask who they are. So that's a perfect example.
Yeah. In the interest of full disclosure, Lindsay, that letter to the editor that you just read out verbatim, that wasn't you writing in under a pseudonym, was it?
No. This man, I've seen his name before. I really don't know who he is. He's from Polaro, a suburb of Brisbane. I've seen him write other letters to the editor. But it just triggered with me, and I thought, everything he says is sensible. But then the very next day, there were 4 other letters decrying what a hopeless case he was, and how the army and the police are there only just to look after us and our benefits. And I thought, I can't understand the thinking there. There seems to be it's this old thing about if you're prepared to give up your liberty for security, you don't get either, or you lose both of them. And that's the way it seems to me. And obviously it seems like that to Merv Bartlett. But the other people don't seem to care. And I'm astounded by this attitude by so many people.
Well, we mix, Ethan and I probably mix with younger crowds than you do, Lindsay. Do you want to give us an idea and give our listeners an idea, the people who you mix with, who are probably a generation or two above us, have you spoken with these people about their general feelings towards G20 and what have you noticed?
No. My problem is I'm looking after an elderly mother, so I really don't get out with very many people now. I see more of you fellas now than I do of anybody my own generation at the moment. I've got lots of friends from northern New South Wales, and I used to talk to them about these same things. I'll give you a very quick, I don't want to take up too much time, but I'll give you an example. When I was a young man, I worked in New Guinea, a 20-year-old, and then I went on my first leave, and I went on one of these voyages, where you go for a trip around the Pacific. And we pulled into American Samoa, and he was a policeman on point duty doing traffic work, and I was sitting on the boat looking down, and he had a gun on his hip, and I was absolutely scandalised by this. Fancy a copper with a gun on his hip doing point duty. And lo and behold, a couple of years later, they all had them here, and now they've got machine guns. It's just it bears out what I'm talking about, the change in my lifetime.
Yeah.
And when I say I was scandalised, I really was. I couldn't believe that the Americans would leave a copper in public with a gun on his hip.
Wow.
And and now look at what we've got.
Yeah.
And hopefully somebody who's now 20 or whatever might understand now the degeneration in our civil liberties and just expectations of our servants over that length of time. Just because you see them with machine guns now doesn't mean that's the way it's always been.
Yeah, exactly. And this notion that it hasn't always been this way, this is something that I've been thinking about a lot and discussing with people a lot, because it does become normalised so quickly.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is the reason why, but it almost seems as though the rise in the police state, which is going exponential, is occurring at a time when the distractions available to the average sheeple is going up exponentially. It's never been easy to get distracted or to care more about trivial things. And at the same time, the police state is rising as so many people don't seem to be paying any attention. But even when I was a kid, the police didn't have the kind of weapons that they have now. In fact, I'm pretty sure when I was a kid, the police who had guns just had revolvers, like six bullet compartment. I don't know the technical term for guns. They could hold six bullets. That was a gun. Now they've all got semi-automatic 9mm pistols, and of course for G20 they're carrying around semi-automatic assault rifles. Essentially, that's just in my lifetime, and I'm a young person. Yeah. So the people who got out of World War II and saw this as the potential for a whole new world of peace and whatever. People like yourself, Lindsay, who were there when things were meant to be okay. I can only imagine what it's like to sit there and watch what's happening today.
Yeah. No. And you think back to, like my mother, for instance, she was born just after the First World War. You imagine the changes that they've seen over a lifetime. Yeah. Anyway, I won't go on about it, but I'm hoping that might get through to some people, just how I viewed that in those days. Yeah.
Oh, look, you could almost have an entire show just dedicated to it hasn't always been this way. Yeah. And don't think that it has to be this way. Yeah. I mean, like I said, the United States Department of Homeland Security was created after 9/11. It didn't exist before that. Yeah. But now there's a whole, people my age in the United States, half of their lives they've had, and the more important half, like the part they remember the best, there's always been a Department of Homeland Security. Yeah. It's becoming normalised. It's becoming normalised. And of course, once that gets normal, something more becomes normal, and before you know it, you are living in a police state. Which, look, as we sit here today in beautiful St. Lucia, we're only a few kilometres away from what is a police state. However, they've restricted it to a small exclusion zone. The question is, how long does that exclusion zone last? And how normalised does that become for the people? Even if they do reduce these police powers after G20, now we've got a taste for it. You know, like an inoculation. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And is that a precipitation for bringing foreign troops in when they want to bring them in?
Exactly. Yeah.
Because
exactly.
And I know years ago there was a fellow called McLam, who was a police officer from America, who toured Australia trying to drum up support for his organisation, which was against the New World Order or whatever. And that was one of the big points he had in the back of his book, was a program of a chart of what countries troops were going to go into other countries to enforce the UN dictates at the time. I mean, obviously your own soldiers are not going to shoot their own people, or we hope they won't, but you just bring in foreigners. And I'm worried about that's the next step.
And eventually on the show we'll get to discuss what's happening in the US right now, where they're essentially giving amnesty to people who come across the border if they agree to sign up to their armed services. Now, you can easily foresee how that might be taken advantage of. Once you've got your official US soldiers over in Africa fighting Ebola, whatever the hell that means, when you've got your soldiers, they just sent another 1,500 to Iraq, so that's 3,000 now. When you've got your actual personnel, your American citizens are fighting in foreign lands, and all of a sudden you've got this new group of personnel who have no real affinity towards America as people, you can easily see that to be abused. But we don't have time to get too much detail about that today. Anything more to add on to G20 before we move on, boys?
No.